Hi, Monarch students, it's Ms. Kurganin, and I am going to lead you through this PowerPoint and worksheet and activities associated with demography, Introduction to Demography. Demography is the study of people. So you're going to need to find this assignment here on Schoology. It's in the population folder, and your worksheet is attached here. It looks like this. It's kind of red, white, and blue intro to demographics notes. So this is what you're going to be filling in as I go through this lecture. And then there is an independent research activity at the end of this lecture. And so this is kind of a two-dayer. I'm thinking that you're going to work on this partly on Wednesday and partly on Thursday, and then you'll be turning it in for an assessment grade. So for your worksheet, notice how it has two videos to start off. You're going to actually pause me and pause this lecture so you can watch these two videos. The first one is 7 reasons to think about 7 billion reasons to think about 7 billion or something like that. And it's from the National Geographic. And as you're watching this, you're going to write down some startling facts that jump out at you because we just hit 7 billion on the planet a few years ago. So you're going to watch that video. And after you watch that video, then there's this one that is called Population Like Water. And this is from the NPR, National Public Radio. And so this one is also has a link either in your worksheet or on the Schoology assignment. And as you're watching this, you are listening for reasons that population slowed down. Actually, you're going to first listen for reasons that the population totally exponentially grew. And then why is population kind of slowing down? So you're listening for those answers on your worksheet. And then what I am leading you through today is this PowerPoint. So if you've paused me for a second so that you can listen to those videos, awesome. And then you're going to come back and we're going to go through this worksheet together. So here's where you hit those videos. And so demography is a study of human populations. And in your worksheet, you are writing down some reasons that migration patterns would influence a country's population. So what are some reasons for migration? And what are 2 effects that migration can cause for a country? So the biggest reason that people travel and try and find a new home in the world is because of jobs, because of economic reasons. So here it says economic recession. So if your country is struggling economically and you've lost your job, that's a reason to try and go seek a job and support your family in another country. So you would write down for number 1, or actually, what are you now on? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now you're on like number 6. You'd write down jobs. And another reason that people migrate is because they don't feel safe. They're fleeing political or individual oppression. So migration has been in the news significantly here in the United States because we are somewhat of a stable country economically, and people are wanting to have the rights and freedoms and jobs that we offer in our country. So there's been a lot of political turmoil in Central America, in South America. And so if you can believe it, there are people who are willing to walk 1,000 miles holding their children just to come to our borders and try and seek refugee status or to seek asylum and to have the opportunity for a job in our country. Okay, a second factor that influences human populations are cultural practices. So your question says, how can cultural practices influence population? How can religious beliefs influence population? So when we're talking about populations of countries, maybe there is pressure to have a large family size. And so you could write down family size, like maybe birth control is frowned upon and that your family is considered wealthy if you have a lot of kids. Or it seems like a lot of you are familiar with the one-child policy that China had for almost 2 decades that limited the amount of children that you could have. So there could be some cultural influences, some pressures to even have a big family or a little family. And so you are writing these notes again in your intro to demography note catcher. Another cultural influence, though, and we'll be talking about this in this unit, is the preference for boys. Believe it or not, there are a lot of countries around the world that if they have a little bit of money, they're going to invest it in just the boy. They are going to send just the boy to school. They're going to hope that just the boy will get a job one day. And then the girls are not invested in, and they end up being the agricultural workers or the factory workers, and they're the ones who don't get to go to school. And where do those attitudes come from? Sometimes those attitudes come from religion, and there are ways that you can interpret religious texts to defend that the man is in charge of the household. Or some of those cultural influences just could be from a power structure there, a very patriarchal, a man-centered power structure. So that has influenced populations. Right now in Southeast Asia, there are more boys than girls because they've had a one-child policy for so long that people preferred to have just a boy, and now there's not enough girls to go around, which is very sad. All right, next factor that influences human populations is economics. So how do economic factors and different standards of living influence how long you live? So when we study population, we're not only looking at how many people are in a region and whether or not they're migrating, but we're also looking just how long are they around and are they living a long time? So your access to healthcare. If you have good healthcare, you're going to live a long time. There'll probably be more of you in the country. If you have sanitation problems and disease, you're not going to live a long time. We're actually seeing countries like Russia, the Ukraine, Latvia actually dropping in life expectancy, and now they're only living to their 50s. So they used to have a much higher life expectancy, living to their 70s. Why is that happening? There's so many heavy metals and so much pollution, it's giving people illness. Another standard of living has to do with education level. How lucky you are that you get to go to free education here at Monarch. Many countries have to pay, and if they can't pay for education, then they're maybe not learning about things that could help them plan families. And maybe they're not very educated about birth control. Maybe they're not very educated in how to manage their families. And so that can affect how well and how successful they are in family planning. Your next factor has to do with politics, and politics can be everything from laws to the government to just straight out war. So the way that government and political aspects can influence a country's population is a government making it peaceful and stable? If it's not, then I wouldn't want to stay there either. Is the government able to satisfy people's needs? When we look at Venezuela, Venezuela was a very developed, successful country. Most of their population was literate. And then they had dictator-like leaders get into power and get super corrupt with the oil industry and really stripped away people's rights and stopped providing services that people needed, including the ability to feed the Venezuelans. And we're looking at famine right now and just distress of the Venezuelan people. And they're frustrated and blame the government for this mismanagement. So politics can really affect a country's population for sure. I'm sorry, I've got to stay on that for one more. And then lastly, besides economic reasons for people traveling and migrating around the world, increasingly we're seeing climate change as a motivator to move. So climate and geography can affect the amount of food and water people have. So if they don't have those natural resources, they've got to go. And drought, floods, tsunamis, natural disasters, increasing storms, hurricanes, cyclones. These are reasons to get out of there. And so where are people going to be moving? They're going to be moving towards more stable countries, and they're going to be moving towards places that offer food and water and that type of resources that people need. So that should have answered the demographic factors section of your notes. And there's a few more questions just to think about. What are factors that could influence an average age of a town? So think about Boulder for a second. Boulder has a lot of young people. Why is that? Well, because we're a college town. And when you have a college town, you have a lot of kids right around 20 years old. Or I don't know if you've ever had a chance to go visit Florida. And if you have, you've noticed that there's a lot of older people there. So older people like where the climate is nice and even and not too hot, not too cold. So Florida is a place where older people congregate. So those are some factors that could influence the average age. When we look at population pyramids later this week and look at what's going on with Qatar, we'll see that that's mostly middle-aged people because they're seeking jobs there. Okay, next question. How economic and cultural factors can cause a location to have a severe gender imbalance. I've already alluded to this, but there's some areas in Southeast Asia that because they've had a preference for a male baby for so long, and they've actually used abortion or really horrible, it's called female infanticide, where they just straight out kill the female baby so that they can have male babies, but that's created a shortage of females. And so now we're looking at cultures that don't have enough females for family planning. How could economic factors, maybe you are building in Saudi Arabia, the oil rigs, or the building in Dubai that lots of manual labor is drawing in males to do those jobs. And because they don't have as many female rights, it's mostly a male-dominated region. And then we see an influx of male workers and not a lot of females. All right, next question. Why would a country have more young people than adults, and how could this strain the economy? At first, it may seem like kind of awesome to think of a country just full of young people, but when we study Kenya as a case study, it's actually not that awesome because adults are the ones that do the jobs. They do the agricultural work. They're your physicians. They're your lawyers. They're your teachers. But what if all of your adults were dying? And in Kenya, we're seeing widespread AIDS spreading through the adult population. And as the adult population dies and leaves those young people vulnerable, we see a country in chaos. So AIDS as an epidemic is really cutting out the adult population, which is sad. All right, last question in this section. What types of events could occur that could rapidly change a country's death rate? Well, we are looking at a pandemic right now that's spreading around the world. So coronavirus is something that you could write down as really changing the death rate of a country. Migration rates, when we have flooding or hurricanes or drought or war, that's going to push people to move and want to seek another country. So that's migration rates. Birth rates. There are some countries right now that are worried that they're not having enough babies, that people stopped having babies, that they're going to work instead of having babies. So they're encouraging birth rates. Or we've also seen countries that are just not really enthused about having a family anymore, and their birth rates are dropping. Infant mortality is and we're going to get into some of those definitions in a second, is the amount of babies per 1,000 that die, which is so sad. You wouldn't want your babies to die. But war, famine, disease are factors that can influence infant mortality rates. All right, let's talk about Malthus, because this is going to be your attendance question for Wednesday. Thomas Malthus looked at population. He looked at food production, and this geographer was a little bit worried. He was like, check it out. Food just grows at a constant rate. It's based on water and sunlight. And so food, he said, is just going to grow at this predictable pattern. But our population over the last 100 years has been exploding exponentially. And so there's a gap here. And he's worried that by like 2020, 2040, we are going to have a gap in the amount of food to feed our people. This is called the Thomas Malthus or a Malthusian view of population, that the human's ability to grow and produce enough food is not going to be successful. So maybe you agree. You're like, you know what? As a human species, we're doomed. Like we have too many people on the planet. We're not going to have enough resources. So it asks you in this question, are you a Malthusian? Maybe you're yes. Yeah, I'm just not very hopeful about the future of the human species because I look at other animal populations and I see what happens when they run out of food. There's blight and famine and disease, and then that herd kind of gets back into a predictable number. Okay, or maybe you're a cornucopian. What's a cornucopian? I have a little picture of it on your note catcher. It's that Thanksgiving basket of plenty. So the neo-Malthusians said, you know what, Malthus, you're wrong. We're still kicking. We're still around. Human beings have not died off. You were coming up with those ideas like back in the 1800s, and we are still here because we are figuring out how to outpace the decline of the human population through innovation. We've got great ideas. We've got GMOs, genetically modified organisms to feed us. We've got pesticides to kill bugs. We've got fertilizers to enhance growing. We've got factory food production and protein and additives. We're always trying to think our way out of these problems. We have food aplenty, like the cornucopian basket. So maybe you are more optimistic and you believe that the human species is going to continue to be kicking because we are always going to use our great minds to think our way out of the problem. Okay, take a breath. I've been talking a long time. We've got another section for the vocab. So you may want to take a break, stand up, walk around, and then come back to me in a second. We're going to do the vocab together. So maybe you guys took a break, or maybe now it's Thursday, you're coming back on another day, but we're going to go through some important vocabulary with demographics. These are the indicators, kind of the math or the data we use to track populations. And we're going to write down not only the definition, but some examples of countries that have high indicators. So let's start first with crude birth rate. Crude doesn't mean like, oh my gosh, that's so like crude and gross. It means like a large number. And crude birth rate is the number, you're going to write down number of live births per 1,000. So we look at an entire population and we're like, okay, how many births for this 1,000? How many births for this 1,000? How many births for this 1,000? And then we have a pattern that looks like this. And this is, if I could scroll down, maybe I can't get down. Oh, there we go. This is a map that's showing from the World Bank data. The countries that are dark are the countries with the highest birth rates. So they are the ones that are expanding the fastest. I don't care if you spell these incorrectly, but I want you to write down Niger, Chad, and Somalia. These are countries that are totally blowing up with their crude birth rate. Niger at 46, Chad with 42, Somalia with 42 more births per 1,000 people. You don't need the numbers, you just need the countries. Okay, next word is crude death rate. It's down here. The number of deaths per 1,000 people. So you might have a country where for every 1,000 people, there's a lot of people dying. So crude death rate, CDR, is going to look like this. Notice, oh my gosh, I first see Russia all of a sudden. So yes, up there in that Russian territory in Europe, in Eastern Europe, they have had a lowering life expectancy, and we're seeing deaths now per 1,000 people rising. So people are not living as long. The countries that are kind of at the top would include Bulgaria, Latvia, and the Ukraine. So again, in my notes, I think I have those written down there. So Bulgaria, Latvia, Ukraine, these are places that are not living as long. Okay, your next indicator is called TFR, or total fertility rate. And this indicator is the number of children the average woman's going to give birth to in a country. So here in the United States, women usually only have about 2 babies. Now, 100 years ago, we had like 13. I can't even imagine having 13 children, because I'm on the average. I only had 2 kids. You're going to probably only have 2 kids if you're female. Your parents only probably had 2 kids. It's rare to have a larger family here in the United States because most women are working outside the home, and it's hard to run a huge family, and 2's about our average. But there are places in the world, and you can see that definitely in Africa or the African continent or in Afghanistan, people are having way more than 2 babies in their lifetime. Now, why is that? That could be because their babies keep dying. Like if we think about Afghanistan, they've been perpetually at war now for almost 50 years. Like their babies die, so they keep having babies to try and keep that family going. But then I also have mentioned in this lecture that there's a preference for male babies. So maybe you keep trying until you finally have a male baby. So the fertility rate is the average number of children a woman's going to have. Niger, Somalia, and the Congo are your top 3 countries. So for every 1,000 babies, there's 7 more, it's not per 1,000. Fertility rate is the average number. So every Niger woman on average is going to have 7 kids. Somalia is going to have 6. Congo is going to have 6 kids. Okay. Next indicator, IMR, is the infant mortality rate. And I know this seems strange that geographers keep track of dead babies. The infant mortality rate is the amount of babies that die for 1,000 live births, like die within their first year. And how horrible to have your baby die. You wouldn't want your baby to die, but if you have a country where your babies are dying, think about what does that tell you about your safety or your health care in that country. So infant mortality rate is actually a very helpful rate to check on a country's economic success or safety. So in this map from the World Data Bank, you'll see that the dark countries are where babies die in record numbers in their first year. Afghanistan and Pakistan and Angola and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So the top countries that you would write down for infant mortality rate are the Central African Republic. Look at that, 81 babies for every 1,000. It's horrible. Sierra Leone at 81 and Nigeria at 74. All right, there's one more indicator that we're having you write down, and it's called the natural increase rate, the NIR. So if you were to take all of the crude deaths and minus them from the crude births and then see what you have left, do you have more or less people? So if you have 20 to 36, you're growing. Your population's getting larger. So here's Niger, that's growing. The United States, we're growing, but we have such a large population, so we're growing by 3. So that's a slow growth, and most of our growth is from migration. And then Bulgaria, look at this, they're actually shrinking. So they're at a -7. In other words, Bulgaria is getting smaller and less in numbers every day. Could be because of migration, could be because of the death rate. So this is the natural increase rate or the population percentage. The countries that are dark are the ones that are growing faster in population than the light color, and the light colors are actually becoming less in population, negative. You can see negative on the scale. So that's called natural increase rate, or NIR. In this PowerPoint, I thought it was helpful to just include a slide about refugees. And you have a question on where are most of the refugees right now coming from? And they're coming from, as you can see, war-torn areas. Syria is involved in the civil war. Afghanistan has been involved in tribal wars, and Somalia is involved in political unrest. And so these are countries that are seeking safety in places that are more stable. And the Syrian refugee crisis has been traumatic because they're seeking safety in places like Iraq. That's not so safe because Iraq has ISIS there. Okay, I'm going to pause for a second. All right, so I was just seeing what are the slides that are next because I wanted to show you after the refugee slide. This is just a FYI, but Mr. DiCarlo and I find it interesting that the countries in red have very early sexual activity, and the countries in green have later sexual activity. And so when we're thinking about where are populated places of the planet, we can see that there's some pressure here to maybe wait and not have sex until you're a little bit later to slow down the family size. This is also an interesting slide that just looks at where can you obtain birth control. And here you can only get birth control in the blue where you have a prescription. And in the yellow is where you can get birth control without a prescription. But in many of these countries in the African continent, you have availability of birth control, but it's not considered very manly to use it. And so that contributes to the spread of AIDS and other diseases if you're not using protection. This is a map that tracks HIV and AIDS by country. And so you can see that the darker countries are really struggling with the spread of AIDS. And AIDS is one of the fastest growing pandemics, I guess besides the coronavirus. And then lastly, I wanted to show you this slide before we do our individual research. This is looking at women's physical security. And I find this fascinating that the darker countries are where women actually can be beaten by their husband or family member, that there are physical punishments for not being escorted by a male, that you are not supposed to talk to other males, that you are not supposed to be walking alone or doing things that are independent, and that there are increasing reports in the news about women being attacked, being raped, being stoned, being beaten publicly to keep them in line. And so how lucky are we that we live in a country that has better physical security? But like I showed you in that travel video, we're not as safe as places in Europe where women have actually more physical security. All right, we're going to take another pause, stretch, because when you come back, you're going to be doing some individual research for the rest of this worksheet. So you're going to have to put your thinking caps on. So take a break for a second and then join me to learn how to do your research. Okay, for this last section of your worksheet, this is where you are going to be answering questions through 25 to 34 using a website that we find really helpful called the CIA World Factbook. And what does our Central Intelligence Agency do? Well, they spy on other countries, but they also keep track of data on other countries. So we're actually going to be going to the CIA website to research your UN country. And there's directions here that you're going to have to look in the search bar to find your country. You're going to be clicking into the People and Society section to find the data on your crude birth rate, on your crude death rate, on your natural increase rate, on your TFR. You're going to record your country's data, but we also want you to compare what is your country's number. What are you ranked? Are you top, the top country that has the crude death rate? More people die in your country than in other countries. Are you the one with the most babies? So we're going to have you compare yourself, compare your country to 3 other countries. And then the very last thing that you do with this data collection is you generalize what's going on for your UN country. So here's how you're going to fill out that chart. That chart is down here. So far you've filled out all of this with me, but this is where we are now in the chart. So you're going to do your UN country, your ranking, find 2 countries higher. And then we thought it was helpful just to kind of compare yourself to the United States as well. So the link takes you here. This is called the CIA World Fact Book. So I love that you can go to the CIA and actually spy on other countries yourself. So you are going to click into your country. And just because I'm feeling like it, I'm going to click into the Ukraine, just because I've mentioned them a couple times with their high CDR. So when you go into your country, and after you pull the pull down menu, a lot of your data is going to come from this people and society section. All of these are hyperlinked, and you can scroll down, and you'll have to scroll a little bit to find what you need. So there's my birth rate. There's my death rate. There's my migration rate. But we ask you some other stuff. We ask you, what is the contraception prevalence? Do they have access to birth control? Which I think I saw. Sorry, I'm struggling with my controls here. I saw it somewhere. Up here. Right there. There's my total fertility rate. So you're going to write these down. But then we also ask you to compare yourself to other countries. So let's look at fertility rate. So in the Ukraine, 1.56 children. So you're going to have about 1 kid in your lifetime, which if you only had 1 kid, that's not replacing yourself. Your population is really going to be shrinking if you only have 1 kid in your lifetime, because you won't have as many people in the next generation to make people. So then you go into country comparison. So I see that the Ukraine is ranked 174th, but I want to write down 2 countries that are higher. I want to go like down here and see what are the countries the highest. And I'm going to see here that, well, no, we're going to go number 1. I got to go up to the top of the list, Kurganin. Oh, Niger. Niger's going to have 7. Angola. I would write down Angola. So in comparison, the Ukraine, where I'm only having 1 kid, to Angola and Niger that are having 5 and 7 in their lifetime, I'm not having as many kids. So when I eventually make my generalization, I'm like, I'm not having as many kids as like countries in the African continent. Okay, let me do another one with you because I know I went kind of fast with that. So let's go to, I'll pick another country just because I'm trying to show you how to do this. Here, I'm going to go to Japan. And in Japan, I am going to pick another statistic to analyze. So I'm going to go into, again, I have to go to people and society. And my indicators, I have to kind of stretch down here and I'll find one. Population growth rate. Okay, here I see I'm negative. I'm actually decreasing with my percentage. So Japan's actually a country that's shrinking. What's their birth rate? 7 births for 1,000. So if I compare to countries of the world and I want to know who's number 1, some of the countries that are number 1 seem to be number 1 over and over again, but not always for a great reason. So here's Niger at the top with their crude birth rate. It's Syria, increasing by 4 for 1,000 births, in Angola. So those are some countries that I would compare myself to. So for your chart, you're going to fill in your statistics. You're going to put in your ranking, some countries that are higher. And notice that this last one says GDP per capita. That one's in the economy section because I have you mostly in the people and society, but some of your information that you're looking for, well, actually just that one piece of data that you're looking for is in economy. GDP per capita means if you took all the money of the country and you divided it by the amount of people, on average, how much is each person worth? Here in Japan, 42,900 per person. So they're a wealthier country per person. People have more money. Compare that to like the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I think this number is only like in the 100s. What do you finally do after your chart is done? In several complete sentences, we'd like you to make 2 generalizations about your UN country and region of the world. So when you are finally done with this worksheet, you are going to save it. You are going to upload to this portal, please, and then you are done. This is the assignment that was to stretch over 2 days, so you can pat yourself on the back that you got that done. That was a lot of information. On Friday, we're going to be learning about something called the demographic transition model. We'll be taking some notes, and then we'll be putting together a report on our UN country with some slides of our own demographic transition. So thanks for listening. I know this was a long lecture. You guys are awesome. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.